What are the best and the worst things about cruising in a suite? I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruising tips for travelers. I want to explore the pros, the cons, the best, the worst things about cruising in a suite when you go on your next cruise. Now, when I go cruising, I often cruise in a balcony cabin. I like a balcony cabin, but when we go cruising with my partner, we often choose to go in a suite for all sorts of reasons. And so I'm going to explore some of the pros and cons right now. So let's start by taking a look at the pros, the best things about cruising in a suite. The first of those is size. Suites are going to be bigger than a balcony cabin, and it could be, depending on the ship, just a little bit bigger. Could be right through to some ships where they are monstrous. They're probably even bigger than your apartment and your home. There could be multi-levels, multiple bedrooms. But the great thing about a suite, generally speaking, is you're going to have a sleeping area, you're going to have some kind of living area, seating area, and then you're going to have a bathroom. Often you'll have a bath and a shower, you'll have twin basins, and then connected to that often you'll have some sort of walk-in closet area, dressing room. So those are the key features of a suite. Then the scale of that just depends on how big a suite that you're in. So you have huge amounts of space. That's really the biggest pro, is the size and the scale that you're going to have of a suite versus, say, a balcony cabin, which is the next level down. You normally find that the balcony on a suite is also much bigger, so you have more room to sit outside if that's something that you like to do. And that's simply because a suite is bigger than a balcony cabin and just is longer, wider, and therefore the balcony is bigger. The second pro or good thing about a suite is they are located in what the cruise line believes are the best locations on the ship. So they'll normally be right at the top of the ship, so you get big grand views. They might be in the front of the ship, so you can look forwards over the bow. They might be at the rear of the ship, so you get that beautiful scene as you're sailing out of port or on sea days. Now, I actually think there are some issues around where suites are located, and I'll talk about those when we get to the cons section. But certainly from the cruise line perspective, these are the premium locations on the ship. The next best thing and pro about a suite is you have all sorts of extra facilities. Now, these can vary depending on the ship you're on. So if you head onto some ships, you'll find the suites are a ship within a ship, so they're all collected together. So for example, on Norwegian, on their bigger ships, they have the Haven, and in here you're going to have your own swimming pool, you're going to have a lounge, you're going to have a concierge service, you're going to have your own dining room, you're going to have a bar, and these are all within one area. And the same is true, say, on MSC with their yacht club. However, on other ships, they may be more dispersed, but you're going to generally find you have your own restaurant, you probably have some sort of lounge or bar area, you're going to have a concierge or concierge lounge as well. So you normally find there are very specific facilities. Normally you'll find there's a pool deck or a deck which has hot tubs on as well that you can use. So very specific suite-only facilities on board the ship. There are also generally with suites 7 perks that you're going to get, and some of these are really quite fun and some of them you may think are less important. But what are the 7 perks that you're going to get? Well, first of all, what you're going to get is priority embarkation, disembarkation, and use of the tenders. This can be great, particularly if you're on really big ships when there's thousands of people boarding. You're going to basically arrive, have your own check-in, you're going to get on board really quickly. Also, if you're in lots of tender ports where you have to use little tenders to get out, you're going to have priority to get on those. And also when leaving the ship, you're going to be able to leave early or choose when you want to leave. So that's definitely one big perk. Second perk is you'll normally find you'll get things like afternoon canapes brought into your cabin. Third area could be many suites will have butlers, and depending on the ship that you're on, it could be an all butler service. So for example, on Silversea, it's all suites and butlers. If you go on, say, Cunard and Queen's Gruel, you have a butler, and then different ships have different rules, but you'll have a butler. The butlers will do things like they'll pack and unpack for you, they'll serve you your meals by course, they'll sort out various problems if you've got them, they'll have your shoes shined, all sorts of little bits and pieces that they'll do for you. The fourth perk you normally find is some kind of drink. So you might find you can go to the lounge, you have free drinks available. But what normally happens in your cabin, you'll have a fully stocked minibar. You can choose what drinks you want and you're not charged for those. So you might be able to order 2 big bottles of something or extra wines. So you'll normally find there's drinks included. You'll find you might, when you arrive, you have champagne. So drinks are normally included. You also have lots of different cocktail parties and things that you're invited to. So lots of drinks are normally included in suites. Another perk you'll find is most cruise lines will then give you upgraded toiletries. So you have very premium toiletries, sort of brand name toiletries. So you normally find, rather in balconies or ocean view or inside cabins, you'll have fairly generic or sort of own brand, the cruise line's own brand toiletries. You'll normally find much more exotic and premium toiletries. Sixth area you normally have is you'll often find you get free or discounted laundry. So normally they're bundled in laundry services, you can send that away. And the other perk that you often will find is normally with suites you're going to get Wi-Fi either included or quite a lot of Wi-Fi included. So there's a whole lot of little bits and pieces around suites that you get as perks. A suite is really good if you need to or want to spend a lot of time in the cabin. So for example, if you're going on a transatlantic cruise where you're going to have 6 or 7 days at sea, whether it's on the Queen Mary 2 or one of the repositioning cruises on other cruise lines, you are probably going to want to spend quite a lot of time in your cabin because you've got 6 or 7 days at sea. So using your cabin becomes quite important. You might want to spend time chilling out there, so you want the extra space, and some of those little bells and whistles and perks are really important. If you're heading on a world cruise, for example, a really extended cruise, you may want to have a suite as well, simply because that's going to be your home for weeks and weeks on end, up to 3 months, and actually having the space to spread out, relax, and feel less claustrophobic perhaps, that could be a real big plus reason for having a suite. If you have mobility issues, you might like the idea of a suite because it's going to have much more space, much more room to get around, and although you can get obviously accessible cabins for all different grades, if you actually are in a suite, you're just going to have so much more space to spread out and enjoy yourself and relax. The next real big plus and pro of having a suite is if you're traveling with other people, and that really falls into 2 areas. So one is if you're a family or you're perhaps traveling with friends. The great thing about a suite is you have that sleeping area and you have the living area. The living area will often have, say, a sofa bed. So actually you effectively got 2 bedrooms because you have space to spread out. So it's really great, you know, if you're traveling with friends, you may want to look at a suite because you might find the cost per person ends up being lower by sharing a cabin. If you're traveling as a family and you've got kids, particularly older kids, having a suite's great because often you'll find in many suites they often have a separate or second toilet area, so it becomes actually great if there's a group of you. So it's really good from that perspective. The other time that I've seen suites used is if you're traveling with an extended group, particularly say a multi-generational family. So part of the family or part of the group may be in smaller cabins. There might be an inside ocean view, balcony, whatever. But if you've got a suite, that's where you can all come together. You can get together before dinner or during the day. You might even get room service in there. You might have drinks together. So you actually have a space which as a family you can come together, which is private. So it's not necessarily in a public space. So that's a real big plus of going in a suite. So what are the worst things about going in a suite? What are the real downsides, the cons of going in a suite? Well, the first one, and probably the most obvious one of all, is price. Suites are expensive. So roughly speaking, you might say if you go from an inside or an ocean view, you might pay 50% to 100% more to go on a balcony, but you could then be paying 50% to 100% or more per day per person to go in a suite. So they are expensive. That's also because they take up so much more space. So it's just the way that logic works. You're going to pay much, much more for a suite. So a lot of people, that's a real downside because you can probably get 2 cruises for the price of 1 suite. So price is absolutely one of the big cons and downsides. The second worst thing or the downside of cruising in a suite is actually many of those perks that you've got are not really worth the extra you're paying for a suite, and actually you can probably pay to get them. Also increasingly what's happening is cruise lines are starting to sell packages where you can buy a lot of those perks. So for example, on Royal Caribbean, they have the Key. On Carnival, they have Faster to the Fund, where you pay and you get lots of extra things bundled in, like priority embarkation, disembarkation, certain restaurants and stuff like that is all bundled in. Wi-Fi, maybe some laundry. So you can actually buy those perks and it's going to cost you a lot less to have a balcony cabin or even an ocean view cabin and pay for the perks. Bear in mind, when you pay for a suite and you get all those perks, you're really paying for extra space. So it's not about the perks. The perks added up together, you probably can buy for cheaper. And especially if you are really clever, you can buy fares where you'll find all those bundled in. So I've booked a couple of cruises for this year where I booked them way in advance, and they've thrown in, I booked a balcony cabin, but they've thrown in drinks packages, Wi-Fi, all that, specialty dining and stuff like that. So that's the downside, is the perks are not really worth the extra. You can buy them for the same or less. One of the things to consider which could be a downside is location. As I mentioned earlier, the cruise lines have suites where they see them as the best locations. And they're certainly the best locations from a visibility and sightseeing perspective. However, if you're concerned about seasickness, many of those places are going to be where there's much more movement. So right at the top of the ship, there's going to be more movement. At the front and the back of the ship, there's going to be more movement. If you're worried about seasickness and motion sickness, you want to be midship, in the middle of the ship, and as low down as possible, and you're more likely to get that in a balcony. So to give you an example, we were on part of a world cruise, a couple of weeks of the world cruise, and we met some people who were staying in the best suite on the ship, right at the back of the ship, and we were going through a period where there was quite a lot of storms and stuff, and we actually went to they had a cocktail party there, and it was really difficult to stand up, and it was really moving about like crazy. In our cabin, which was midships, you barely registered that you were going through a storm because we're in the middle of the ship. So one of the downsides is the locations, although they're great from a sightseeing perspective, if you're concerned about motion and seasickness, a suite could be a real downside. The next area that could be the con is you paid quite a lot of money for a suite, but if you're on a very, very port-intensive cruise, so every day you're in port for extended periods of time, there's lots of things you want to do, you're actually not going to really be using your suite. You're literally going to be using your suite to get changed, get dressed, and head out. So actually, you need to ask yourself, is actually the extra cost of a suite really worth it? Now, it might be because you've decided the perks or the access to some of those private suite facilities do make it worthwhile. But if you're on a port cruise, you need to think about, am I really going to use those facilities, those perks, or am I actually better just go to a balcony cabin, perhaps buy a couple of those perks because I'm going to be out in port so much. Another possible con downside of a suite, although you've paid quite a lot of money, you've got the perks, you've got those special things, through the rest of the ship and many of those things, you're still going to be jostling with other passengers. So if you're heading to the casino, you're going to the theatre, you're going out and about around the ship, you're going to events, activities, talks, whatever, you're going to be jostling normally with the rest of the cruise passengers. So it doesn't actually buy you perks and benefits and everything, because when you're in the rest of the ship, out of that special suite space, you're going to be with the other passengers, acting, interacting, and doing the same as they're doing, whether they're inside cabin, balcony, ocean view, or suite. It's all going to be the same. I hope you found that helpful. I have loads more tips, advice, videos about cruising, so why don't you watch another one of those right now.